Welcome back to the Mid-Year Mitch YouTube channel. In today's episode, we're on the quest to make 500 horsepower with this little 327, which is the heart of the Misfit Split. So be sure to stick around. So before we get into details about the engine, let's hear the music of my people. So this little 327 is bored 30 over. It is an original 67 Corvette block. It was originally a 300 horsepower block, and it has a GM forged crank. Other than that, everything else is aftermarket that you see on top. So I called my friends over at Rhodes Performance and told them that I have this little 327 that I want turned up to 500 horsepower. So I want it to be high compression, high revving, I want it to have a solid roller cam, I want it to have a single plane intake, and just be a really good overall engine that I can still drive on the street. So this is the combination that they came up with. So starting from the bottom of this 327, it has forged aluminum Moly power pack pistons connected to forged H-beam rods from Cali's. The camshaft is an Urson solid roller cam, and that camshaft will dictate the RPM range of the engine. The specs on it are 246 degrees at 50 on the intake and 254 on the exhaust. And the lobe separation angle is 107 degrees. So on top of the 327, I have these beautiful AFR heads. These are the keys to making 500 horsepower with this engine, and they make some of the best cylinder heads in the industry. So these specific heads are their 210cc intake port heads, and they have a 65cc combustion chamber in them. They offer it in 65 and 75. And with this smaller combustion chamber combined with the dome piston down below, this thing will have 11.2 to 1 compression. So on top of 327 is an Edelbrock Victor Jr. single plane intake, and it is an air gap. So your stock hood probably won't clear anymore, but I have extra clearance for that. The single plane intake will make nice horsepower up at the top of the RPM range, where a dual plane would make better horsepower and torque down low. So I want this to be a screamer, so I was willing to sacrifice that little bit down low to make big gains up top. And on top of the Edelbrock Victor Jr., we have a Brawler carburetor, which is like a Holley owned, Holley knockoff essentially. It's a nice, real nice carburetor. This is a 750 CFM, and it's got some real trick anodizing going on. So this thing should be pretty sweet. And then in the back of the engine here, I have an MSD distributor. I'll have the little box that I run with this, but the cool thing about this one is it is a tack drive. I don't know if you can see that. It's a tack drive distributor because I'm old school and I wanted to run the old school tachometer on this. So now you know what parts are in this little 331, so place your bets down below what kind of numbers this thing is gonna make, and let's hit the dyno.
Thinking for horsepower? What were you hoping for?
I was hoping to get somewhere close to 500. I saw it looked like 480 flash on the screen there.
487.
487. That's healthy. That's healthy.
Goes out pretty flat. Yeah, it keeps going.
Oh yeah.
We can see where she turns at. You can go out a little further if you want.
Okay.
carries out. I even went over 8 grand a little bit. Look how flat that thing's going out there.
Oh man.
I'm about half scared to see where it's actually going to turn at. I mean, it's got good rods in it.
Thing rips.
Look how that thing goes out. It just goes out. It just keeps going out. I mean, it's jumping down a little, but it's not like...
Yeah, not dropping off.
Give it some more carburetor.
Yeah.
How much runtime you got on this?
How many pulls?
Yeah.
Well, I ran the shit out of it. Huh? 25 pulls and all that.
Oh man.
25.
That's awesome.
It's smooth, man.
You want to try it?
Yeah, if you show me what to do, I'll do it. I had never run a dyno before, so he kind of coached me along, and I did okay my first go around, but I really enjoyed it. So here's that pull. Since it was so close to 500 horsepower, they figured maybe it just needs a little bit more carburetor. So they threw an 850 carb on top of this thing. And it made 505 horsepower at 6,900 RPM and 431 foot-pounds of torque at about 52 or 5,300 RPM. So you might be wondering, how can a little 327 make 500 horsepower? Well, really, horsepower is a measure of torque and RPM. So if you have a big block, for example, that has a lot of bore and a lot of stroke, you need a lot less RPM to make 500 horsepower, versus this little 327 has a shorter stroke and a smaller bore, so it takes more RPM to make the same amount of power. So let's do some quick math here. This engine made 505 horsepower, so 505 divided by 331 cubic inches is 1.52 horsepower per cubic inch. Now, just for a comparison, let's say a 505 383 stroker, that would be 1.31 horsepower per cubic inch. And just to keep the comparison going, let's say we have a 505 horsepower 427. So that's 1.18, just to give you perspective to show you how efficient this engine is at making power. So the cool thing about this little 327 is it's built with really good parts, but they're not crazy exotic parts. Anybody can build this setup if they really want to. So one reason why this 327 makes such good power at RPM is because it has a shorter stroke compared with the 350 or 383, even though they share the same bore size of 4 inches. So since the stroke is physically shorter, the piston doesn't have as far to move up and down to maintain a consistent speed. So if your crankshaft is where you measure your RPM. So if this is spinning at 7,000 RPM, if your piston doesn't have very far to move, your speed is slower, versus if this is spinning at 7,000 RPM and you have a long stroke, that piston's really moving fast up and down. One, that adds a lot more friction because there's friction against the rings to the cylinder wall, but it also has a lot of momentum going up and down. So when every time the piston has to change direction, the crankshaft is absorbing that energy, because pushing down is making it go forward, but as soon as it has to go back up the other way, it's robbing a little bit of power from the engine. So if you make all of that shorter and you reduce friction, in theory, you can wind this thing up faster. It has less momentum. It should RPM quicker because there's less rotating mass involved. So if you're new to the channel, this 327 is in the car that I named the Misfit Split, which is just a hodgepodge of other cars. There's 20 or 30 cars that came together to build this one car. And I don't want it to be painted. I want it to be kind of ratty, but I also want to be able to race this car. So I don't want to dedicate it to one type of auto sport. I want to do autocross, road racing, drag racing, whatever it may be, and I even want to road trip the car. So it's kind of the Swiss Army knife of cars, in my opinion. So I wanted an engine that could kind of do a little bit of everything. So I'll have nice high RPM, to go on an autocross, so I could leave it in a lower gear and just wind this thing up, leave it in one gear the whole time. Or on a road course, you can really wind this thing up on the straightaways. So this car is going to be a lot of fun once, you know, I learn how to drive this car, because it's probably going to be a handful with this 327. But I'm really excited to get this thing started up in the car. So hopefully this was a good video for you guys out there. I was really excited to put this one together. It was a big video to make, and it was definitely an expensive video to make. This wasn't cheap. But I hope you guys enjoyed. I really can't wait to get this thing fired up. So hopefully in about a few weeks to a month, we should have this thing running and driving under its own power. So if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. Leave a comment down below. Tell me what you think of this little 327, and if you yourself would want to build one. I think it's a really cool idea to build a screaming 327. It's just something different. And I think whenever this thing shows up at car shows with this big thumping cam and those really big side pipes, everybody's gonna come to say, what the heck is in this thing? And I put the original style 63 Corvette decals on top, so when you pop the hood, everybody knows it's a 327. And because it's a 67 block, I had to put on the Built by Chevrolet decal on the valve cover, just for that little touch of originality, even though there's nothing really original about this, but I just thought it was a cool touch. So I got a lot of work to do. I'll catch you guys later.